President Trump continued to demand these prosecutions of his own opponents. The DOJ on this blatant tear, new charges against the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, former Director Comey, and other moves against officials who have crossed Trump. News of the DOJ pushing a grand jury to indict Trump's own former aide. John Bolton was a big deal going into the weekend. Trump also now pushing for new charges against Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, calling on the, quote, authorities that he controls to investigate the senator. And this comes after Trump named Schiff among two other people who have since been indicted. Schiff was an especially prominent leader of Trump's first impeachment, which is, of course, a lawful process where Congress can discuss or seek removal of a sitting president. But Trump's admitting in public to an unlawful plot to try to get Schiff indicted for that, and regardless of evidence. Now, abusing powers to charge and jail individuals, to threaten, silence, or kneecap opponents is much more associated with foreign autocrats than American government. Trump has blatantly admitted his goals to go get critics without even claiming to name reasons or specific crimes. Systems that punish or disappear opponents are not considered very democratic. And elections don't mean much if the top rivals to a potential autocrat are just stuck in jail. An election in that format doesn't work very well. And that's what we've seen in Putin's Russia. Donald Trump's moves don't come in isolation. They come as he tries to seize powers to keep troops and federal agents across U.S. streets, even as some judges are limiting those powers as we go. Now, this is serious. It is happening, and it is not popular. While Trump has been bluntly pushing hard because the DOJ wouldn't do any of these cases under the traditional rules, with many of the longstanding and nonpartisan staff, up until very recently, they weren't getting these charges, remember? But his own team knows that this is unpopular, and they are denying what is happening, partly, apparently, because to admit it would make it even worse. Take Vice President J.D. Vance. Remember, he's a Yale-educated lawyer who said in 2016 he worried Trump was either cynical, like Nixon, or worse, a, quote, morally reprehensible person who could be, Vance infamously said, quote, America's Hitler, unquote. Now, Vance reversed himself once Trump came to power, and unlike Donald Trump today, who admits these revenge goals are based on the people, go get these people, he names them, not any type of evidence, not any type of legal process, but Vance now claims against the evidence that it's all just normal law and facts.
Is the Department of Justice acting on orders from the president to prosecute his political opponents with the final 30 seconds we have left?
No, we're driven by the law and the facts of the case. I think if you look at the case, the fact that a far-left grand jury in a far-left area indicted Letitia James and James Comey, if you look at the fact that James Comey obviously lied under oath, Letitia James obviously committed mortgage fraud, what we're doing is letting the law drive the prosecution decisions in the Department of Justice. You know who we haven't prosecuted? Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton.
The Trump-Vance DOJ, of course, is the source of contradicting Vance's claims. The law and the facts were what drove us up to this point, and without any recent indictments. For several months, on these cases, I'm not talking in general, but on the Comey and James case, there was a process, and the law and the facts did not result in charges, even in a DOJ with a Trump attorney general and Pam Bondi's picks for who should be U.S. attorney. And so if you watch the news, you know what happened next and why Vance is wrong. The Trump DOJ swapped in this new, very inexperienced prosecutor who would do precisely what DOJ would not do before, what the facts and law had not deduced before. So Trump's mindset is clear. He's agitated to indict opponents since his first campaign. It has taken this long, however, to distort and sort of restaff the DOJ to find people willing to risk their law licenses and maybe more to do what he wanted.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Here's former Vice President Kamala Harris calling out Donald Trump's weaponization of the Justice Department during an exclusive interview with MSNBC's The Weekend, our own Eugene Daniels.
And what we see is that the rule of law is very much under attack by this president, who thinks that the Department of Justice is his personal lawyer and is basically subverting the will of the people around constitutional safeguards.
Joining us now is former CIA Director John Brennan. He is now an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. He's also one of the president's legal targets. In July, the Justice Department acknowledged it had opened an investigation into Director Brennan.
Director Brennan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for being with us.
So I think specifically about the Eastern District of Virginia and the fact that this is an office that has historically been focused on terrorism cases, national security cases. What is the cost of their being focused on anything other than the actual threats to the homeland?
Well, I think there are two main costs. One is the opportunity cost, that they're not pursuing the cases that they need to pursue, whether it is something related to terrorism or counterintelligence or one of the things that's really threatening our national security, because the Eastern District of Virginia, as you said, has been the basis for, carrying out some of these, indictments and pursuing justice for it. But the other one is that it's undermining the credibility of the Department of Justice and the Eastern District of Virginia. If Donald Trump sends in his personal lawyer to be the acting district attorney, he really is sending a signal that he's going to be politicizing that office. And again, that office is just so important and so valuable in terms of our national security. And so again, an opportunity cost that's lost, but also undermining the credibility and the legitimacy of the indictments that they're going to bring forward. So I think it is really just raising some serious questions across the board.
You have this ongoing effort to raise those questions. Quite honestly, it's deliberate. I mean, they want to create the tension and the confusion within the organizations that that stand up the pillars of law and order and justice and public service and all of those things. I've asked you before, Director Brennan, specifically about the agency that you once led and the impact that this has had on them at that time. Now I'm broadening that lens out a little bit further and looking at the system-wide deconstruction, the wholesale firing of federal employees indiscriminately, the shutting down of the federal government. To Alicia's point, creating these levels of disruption that in the face of what we see happening right now in the Middle East. I mean, I don't even know how there's a plan to really carry this out when you are doing what you're doing in State Department, CIA, other intelligence agencies that are going to be critical to the success of the plan the president just, with Bravo, completed, at least phase one. How does the rank and file members across the government look at this and go, why do I go to work tomorrow? Well, they can't right now. But, at some point, how do they get back into this in a way that helps the country?
Trump admitted that on the campaign's biggest stage, the debate. That was 2016, of course. And while he may want a Putin-like DOJ approach to any and all of his opponents, whether they're running directly against him or the Republicans next term or wherever it leads, judges are limiting some of the related efforts he's making, stationing troops all over the place, the new appeals court blocking that. Then there are the ICE agents, their tactics, drawing new scrutiny in Chicago. There's an outcry. Agents posted up outside a church during Sunday Mass, while other agents went right after a Marine's parents.
Reports of federal agents near a Catholic church during Sunday services. The priest on video urging his parishioners to leave Mass with extreme caution.
Churchgoers leery to leave their parish.
The Catholic priest gave an unexpected warning to parishioners, urging them to leave cautiously because immigration officers were reportedly in the area.
I think they've been casing the church. The parents of a U.S. Marine are being detained by immigration officials.
Her family was coming to take her and her husband to breakfast on September 28th when they were stopped at the gate, and Steve says ICE arrived.
Another weekend of federal law enforcement efforts with the government vowing there will be more.
And there is a growing opposition to this, even though, remember, we are in a time in America, not unlike the McCarthy era, where some of the opposition is even more muted than it would normally be because some people are understandably afraid or getting more quiet or just avoid politics at church and at work. And I'm not here to lecture you about who can do what when. People make up their own minds in a democracy, kind of the whole point, about how to involve themselves, when and how to stand up if they choose to. But even against that effort at muting, at censorship, at the FCC late night agenda, even against all that, we see a wider group of people, from conservative podcaster Joe Rogan to MTG recently calling out ICE. I'll show you that later tonight. To President Obama, who is careful not to speak out all the time. He's not running a daily politics podcast, but has chosen again this inflection point. He's speaking out again about these problems, what Trump does, and what he views as the bias and how it's all covered.
If I had sent in the National Guard into Texas and just said, you know what, a lot of problems in Dallas, you know, a lot of crime there, and I don't care what Governor Abbott says, I'm going to kind of take over law enforcement because I think things are out of control. It is mind-boggling to me how Fox News would have responded.
This is the crackdown, and it goes from the selective prosecutions to the ICE tactics to a president who in year one is testing how far he can get away with having troops and agents out on a regular basis all over the country in year one. So what do you think he'll do if he gets away with it going into year two, the midterms, let alone year four, whether we ever have peaceful transfers of power in this country?
What's clear from all this coverage is that Trump is running a personal enemy list, and he isn't even hiding it. From former FBI Director James Comey to New York Attorney General Letitia James, and even Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, anyone who's crossed him politically is now in his crosshairs. These actions aren't about evidence or the law driving prosecutions. They're driven by his personal vendettas. Trump openly calls for investigations and indictments against people he sees as opponents or that he personally doesn't like, admitting in plain sight that his goal is retribution. The pattern is consistent. If you've opposed him in a meaningful way, you are a target. And while the Department of Justice claims that it's following the laws and the facts, the timing and the orchestration and the obvious political bias here tells a different story. Charges that were previously not pursued and were dropped suddenly get revived under prosecutors willing to bend the rules to suit his political ends. And what kind of ends he had to go to even get these lawyers to prosecute. And what's especially striking is how systemic this has become. It's just all over the place now. Trump is targeting political rivals while reshaping the institutions meant to hold him accountable. He installed everyone in charge of these agencies. DOJ offices, federal agencies, and even the intelligence organizations are now all caught in this swirl. Former CIA Director John Brennan highlights the dual impact of this. National security work suffers because prosecutors are chasing his political enemies instead of genuine threats, and public confidence in these institutions erodes because everyone knows that they're not being used for their legitimate purposes. Federal employees who believed that they were serving the country and the greater good are now worried about their jobs and having to professionally work for something that is overly politicized and weaponized instead of the people who actually deserve to be tried under the law. College students and career public servants are left asking whether public service at all is worth pursuing or still has any kind of meaning if it's just a minefield for retaliation and political actions against Trump's enemies. People don't know whether they can even be in the federal service anymore. Trump's approach mirrors tactics more often associated with autocrats than U.S. presidents. By pushing prosecutions against his critics and stationing federal agents across the country, he's sending a clear signal. Opposition carries consequences. And this creates fear, it creates tension and confusion, not only for the targets, but for the organizations even meant to uphold law and order and the people he sends out for that. Even Vice President J.D. Vance, who previously called Trump America's Hitler, now tries to frame these actions as normal law enforcement, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. And there's a lot of it mounting. And it doesn't stop at domestic politics either. This mindset seeps into foreign policy too, raising questions about the credibility of America on the world stage. Can a government targeting its own officials and its own citizens really be trusted to negotiate peace abroad? No, I don't think so. Trump's selective focusing on enemies at home could also undermine serious international efforts, showing that personal vendettas are dictating his priorities rather than the public interest. At the end of the day, Trump's strategy is about consolidating power, punishing dissent, and signaling loyalty, an ongoing campaign of retribution that undercuts democratic norms. Comey, James, Schiff, the list is quite long actually, and it is growing every day. The question isn't whether this is happening, It's how far he can push before institutional limits and public backlash intervene, or if he ever gets, any kind of accountability at all. The warning lights are definitely flashing, and every move reinforces the reality. In Trump's America, crossing him is no longer just political, it's dangerous.